I'm going to use the key of C major for my examples, and of course everybody knows the notes in C major are C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. The first thing we should do is look at a chord scale in the key of C major. These are going to be all the chords, the basic major and minor chords in this particular key. Okay, so the first chord is going to be C, so it's the root. The second chord is going to be D minor. The third chord is E minor. Fourth chord is F, and then G, A minor, and then B half diminished, or you could call that a B minor 7 flat 5. It's the exception chord here. It breaks the rule because there's a flat 5, so it's a little weird. And then, of course, we'd be back to our octave C major. So there you see we have 7 different chords based on the key of C major. And it's really important to know that each chord is related to the key of C major. None of the notes in any of the chords goes outside of the key of C major. Everything is related. It's all the same notes, but just starting from a different point within the scale. Okay, the names of the modes are Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. We could say that each chord we covered here in the C major scale represents a different mode. Each chord was a different step of the major scale, and so was each mode. And that's what modes are all about. So let's cover the names, and I'll show you what chords represent what modes. Okay, the first chord, C, which is the root, represents Ionian mode. Now, remember this rule, that Ionian mode is always a major scale. It's always the root of a major key. So if somebody said, let's jam in C Ionian, you would know that you were in the key of C major. If somebody said they wanted to jam in G Ionian, then you'd know very simply that you were in the key of G major. So it's a very easy rule. You know, Ionian is always the major scale or the major key you're in. Okay, so the next is Dorian, which is represented in this particular key by D minor. We know 2 things about Dorian. We know Dorian is typically a minor chord, and also that it is the second step of a major scale. Okay, the next mode would be Phrygian, which is represented by E minor. Phrygian is typically a minor chord, and also it is the third step of a major scale. Okay, the fourth step is Lydian, which is F in this case. The fifth step is Mixolydian, which is major, which is G. The sixth step is A minor, which is Aeolian. Now, okay, here's rule number 2. Everybody knows that a major key has a relative minor. In this particular key, C major, the relative minor is A minor, and this represents Aeolian mode. So the rule is Aeolian mode always represents the minor scale or the minor key that you're playing in. So remember that, because it's going to be easy to relate things to that later. Okay, so our final chord here is going to be the B minor 7 flat 5, or the B half diminished. It's going to represent Locrian. This is the weird one in the bunch. So that completes the 7 different modes. So I showed you all the chords in a major scale, and we showed you what chords represent what modes by the name. Okay, so the next thing I recommend that you do is put all these chords on tape, either with a drum machine or a click track, so you can keep time, and practice playing a 1-octave scale over the different modes. So in other words, start first with a C chord, put that on tape, and play a C scale over top of it in 1 octave. And that'll give you an idea of what Ionian mode sounds like. So let's move up to the next chord, or the next mode, which is Dorian. Here, put a D minor on tape and play a D Dorian mode. And one thing I want to stress before I move on here is right there on the D Dorian mode, I didn't play a D minor scale, I didn't play a D major scale, I played a D Dorian mode, and all that is basically a C scale but starting from a D note. So don't get confused and think just because I'm starting with a D here that I'm going outside of the key of C major. I'm not. I'm using all the same notes, and as I will with all these different modes. And I would kind of relate this to the piano. If you played all the white keys on the piano, you'd be playing in the key of C major, obviously. you could start a scale on the C note and play, and you'd be in C major. You could also start a scale on the D note, the E note, the F note, any note. As long as you played all white keys, you'd still be in the key of C major. All right, so the next mode is Phrygian, so put the E minor chord on tape and play the mode over it. Okay, then move up to the F chord, which is Lydian. And that gives you a good idea of what the Lydian mode sounds like. And then the next chord would be G, which would be Mixolydian, and play that particular mode over top of the G. It's a good idea of what Mixolydian sounds like. The next mode is Aeolian, which is A minor, which we said was the root of the minor scale. Put that on tape and play a 1 octave scale over it. And then our final mode is going to be Locrian. It's going to be the B minor 7 flat 5 chord. So that gives you a good idea of what Locrian mode sounds like. Okay, so we went through all the different modes here, and we played a 1 octave scale over them. And the whole point, really, in this was to show you, basically, that we're not going outside of the key of C major. We're just starting at different points in the C major scale. You're basically only in one key here, but starting at different points. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're really going to define the sound of the modes. What we're going to do is take one bass note, and it's going to be a B here, and I want you to put this on tape and play all the different modes over this B note. So in other words, we're going to play B Ionian, B Dorian, B Phrygian, B Lydian, B Mixolydian, B Aeolian, and B Locrian. So we're going to have a bunch of different modes all over the B note, and this is going to help you really hear the different and the tonalities of all the different modes. So the first thing we're going to do is want to build a B Ionian. Now, as we said before, the Ionian mode is always a major scale, so very simply we're going to be in the key of B major. So put a B note or a B major chord on tape and then play the B scale over it and then improvise with it a little bit just to get the feel for what it sounds like. Okay, so our next mode is going to be the Dorian mode. So let's build a B Dorian. We know two things. We know that Dorian is minor, so it's going to be a B minor chord. And we also know that Dorian is the second step of a major scale. And since we know that Dorian is the second step of a major scale, obviously the first step is A. So very simply, you know you're in the key of A major, but you're playing over the second chord, B minor, and you're starting with a B note. So put the B minor chord on tape and play the B Dorian scale, which is going to be the A major, starting with a B note. All right, so there's a good example of what a Dorian mode sounds like. I call it the Western mode, so try to visualize the sound. You know, put it into some thoughts in your head so you can easily remember it. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is build a B Phrygian, because Phrygian is next in line. We know that Phrygian is typically a minor chord, and it's the third step of a major scale. So if B is the third step, then our first step must be G. So we know we're playing in the key of G major, and its relative minor would be E minor. So we'd be playing in G major, E minor, but starting with a B note over a B chord. So put the B minor chord on tape, play the scale over it, and then improvise to get a feel for it. right, so there's what Phrygian sounds like. It's kind of a mysterious, eerie type of feel. And there is an exception on this mode. We said that it was typically a minor chord, but one thing I want to point out, and this is done a lot in classical music, is you can substitute a major chord here. So we'd make B minor, B major, which would mean we would change the D note to D sharp. Make B major. So now go through, put the chord on tape again, play the scale, but what you have to do is, since we made D, D sharp, we have to change all the notes in the scale from D to D sharp. Okay, so here's what that sounds like. All right, so there's the other way we can use a Phrygian mode. Okay, so our next mode in line is Lydian, so we're going to build a B Lydian. B Lydian. Lydian is a major chord, so it's going to be B major. And Lydian is the fourth step from a major scale, so very easily we can find out that the first step is F major, so we know we're in the key of F major, and the relative minor would be E flat minor. So let's play that scale over the B chord, which is going to be Lydian mode. All right, so there's a good idea of what Lydian sounds like. One thing that really defines the Lydian mode is that there's a tritone. Over the B chord, we have an F note in there, which is really kind of weird, but if you play the B and play the F in a higher octave, you get like a really cool kind of effect. That's one thing that really defines the tonality of a Lydian mode. It kind of sounds a little weird just playing it over one note like this, but I think if you experiment with it and play it in some of your chord progressions, you'll find it's a real interesting mode. It's one of my very favorite ones. Okay, so our next thing we're going to do is build a Mixolydian mode, a B Mixolydian, because Mixolydian is the next in line. So we know that Mixolydian is a major chord, so it's going to be B major. And we also know that Mixolydian mode is the fifth step of a major scale, or we know that Aeolian follows Mixolydian. So if somebody said, hey Vin, let's jam and be Mixolydian, how I would know where I was at is I would relate it to the Aeolian mode, which is right after it. So I would quite simply look at the neck, play the B chord, move it up a whole step to the Aeolian mode, which is a C sharp minor chord. So I would know that I was basically in the key of C sharp minor, or E major would be the relative major, and I'd just be starting from the B note. So put that on tape and play the C sharp minor scale starting with B, and you'll get the Mixolydian tonality. So there you have your Mixolydian sound. Okay, so our next mode is Aeolian. We're going to build B Aeolian. As we said before, Aeolian is always the root of a minor scale, so if we're playing B Aeolian, we're very simply in the key of B minor, and the relative major is D. So let's put that on tape. and play the scale over it and then improvise with it a little bit. Alright, so there's B Aeolian. Okay, so our last and final mode is going to be the weird one, Locrian. And so the chord is going to be a B half diminished. And put that on tape and play the scale over top of it and then improvise with it a little bit. So there's what a B Locrian sounds like. And by the way, how we find out what key we're in right there is I would relate it to the Aeolian mode, which is right before it, so I would know if we were playing B Locrian that we were in the key of A minor, or also the major scale is right next to it too, the Ionian. So we could say it's either the 7th step from a major scale or it's the 2nd step from a minor, but it'd be easier just to compare it to the minor scale and know which is right next to it and play an A minor and just start from the B note over the B chord. You know, what I normally do is just to play a bunch of diminished triads over top of it. That type of thing.